The psychology of sudden reality shifts. Psychologists examining reality shift reports often begin with the link between emotional strain and altered perception. Trauma, grief, and stress do more than weigh on the mind. They can disrupt how events are encoded, stored, and recalled. Instead of preserving experiences in a neat sequence, the brain under pressure fragments them, leaving gaps that later return as distorted or surreal memories. These fragments, when reassembled, may feel like unfamiliar histories sliding into a familiar life. For some individuals, this reconstruction mimics the very anomalies people describe as sudden shifts in reality. Clinicians have documented cases where traumatic episodes led to entirely false recollections, complete with rich sensory detail, that patients believed as firmly as any true memory. Dissociation plays a central role in this process. It occurs when a person detaches from thoughts, memories, or their sense of self. A simple way to explain it to viewers is this. Dissociation is when the mind creates distance between me and what I am living. Within that experience are two phenomena. Derealization is the sense that the surrounding world feels staged or artificial, like walking through a movie set instead of reality. Depersonalization is the sense of being cut off from one's own body or mind, as though observing oneself from a distance. Both are common after trauma or stress, and both can create the strange impression of stepping into an alternate version of the world. The first case in this series, the man recovering from a car crash who insisted on speaking with a brother who had died years earlier, illustrates this process. He faced life-threatening stress, and his perception of continuity broke. The image of his brother emerged not as a ghost or a visitor from another reality, but as a vivid confabulation created by a brain under strain. From a clinical perspective, his call was an attempt by memory to stitch past and present into one seamless narrative. Hospital staff did confirm that he seemed coherent in those minutes, but psychology explains this not as proof of crossing dimensions, but as a mind-building stability where none existed. Memory distortion, however, is not limited to trauma. Ordinary life provides countless openings for suggestion, misattribution, or error. Case 2, the mother who swore her child had once had blue eyes, shows how certainty can arise without grief or injury. She was healthy, stable, and supported by her community. Yet both she and her friend recalled the eyes differently from the photographic record. This aligns with what psychologists call reconstructive memory. Each time a memory is recalled, it is rebuilt rather than simply retrieved. Current context and emotions shape it, and with repetition, details no longer match the original event. In this way, a description of blue eyes given years earlier may have solidified into her personal truth. Through source monitoring errors, her friend might have internalized that belief until it became her own. No trauma was involved, only the normal, fallible function of memory. Formal research on reality-shifting practices reinforces this perspective. A recent review linked reported shifting experiences to traits such as immersive daydreaming, high hypnotizability, dissociative absorption, and especially social media practices designed to induce shifts. Popular induction techniques, like the Raven method, where people lie still and visualize themselves waking into a new reality, resemble self-hypnosis more than interdimensional travel. Understood in those terms, intentional shifting exploits the same mechanisms of imagination and absorption that already shape many spontaneous cases. Skeptics point to these models as sufficient to explain nearly all reports. If trauma fragments memories, if suggestion rewrites recollection, and if intentional practices mimic hypnosis, then supposed anomalies are simply exaggerated outcomes of the mind's own tendencies. This reasoning goes far. Grief and injury account for vivid distortions, while the rest are explained by the unconscious act of reconstructing memory. Nothing paranormal is required, but the limits appear when patterns do not align neatly with that framework. If trauma explained everything, then anomalies should cluster around only moments of loss or crisis. Research shows that many do, but not all. Significant numbers appear in uneventful contexts. People describe being rested, lucid, and consistent, with family or colleagues confirming their state of mind. The presence of corroborating witnesses complicates matters further. While the fallibility of memory is well supported, the probability that 2 or 3 individuals misremember the same thing simultaneously remains less easily dismissed. Grief, in particular, shows how deeply emotion reshapes what we perceive. In bereavement, the brain resists accepting absence, leading many mourners to experience what are called sensory or quasi-sensory encounters with the deceased. Hearing their voice, glimpsing their figure, or feeling them in the room is common. These experiences are typically recognized as hallucinations, but they often feel indistinguishable from reality. Over time, they may even alter the way the bereaved recall past events, making them believe interactions occurred that never happened. This is not simply a memory mistake, but a restructuring of one's personal history in light of loss. The interplay between memory and identity deepens the effect. Losing someone reshapes how individuals view themselves and their lives. Memories of the deceased, what they looked like, how they acted, can shift as the grieving work to integrate loss into their narrative identity. Fragmented moments are filled in with imagined continuity. For some, these altered fragments crystallize into full memories that feel real. When such memories conflict with evidence, the experience can feel not just wrong, but as though the world itself has realigned. Dissociation, derealization, and grief-driven hallucinations each provide models for why sudden shifts feel so visceral. For viewers, imagine this. Memory is not a fixed recording. It is a sketch redrawn each time it's remembered. Trauma tears at the sketch, stress exaggerates its distortions, and social confirmation inks those distortions into permanence. In extreme scenarios, the sketch is so different from the original event that it constitutes an entirely new reality for the person remembering. At the same time, reports with multiple observers stretch the edges of psychology. The father who insisted on an alternate childhood for his daughter, or the tenant whose neighbors backed his mirrored apartment, bring up a genuine gap. Confabulation can explain why one memory goes astray. It is harder, though not impossible, for confabulation alone to explain why several individuals seem to converge on the same anomaly independently. Group reinforcement does create shared false memories, often called collective false recall, but not all cases fit easily within normal patterns. Skeptical analysis emphasizes caution. Maladaptive daydreaming, derealization episodes, and intentional induction mirror many features of so-called reality shifts. Many accounts fit this template and reveal how ordinary psychological functions, pushed to extremes, give rise to extraordinary stories. Yet even those explanations accept that memory, grief, and trauma can reshape reality with profound force. For witnesses immersed in the experience, the outcome feels no different than if they had truly stepped into another world. Researchers remain careful. They outline psychological scaffolding strong enough to explain most reports, but they also acknowledge unanswered outliers. Trauma, dissociation, false memory, and social reinforcement construct a convincing model. Still, for communities reviewing cases with corroboration, unexplained digital elements, or multi-witness claims, gaps remain. Those gaps do not close easily, and they ensure the debate continues. What is clear is that psychology offers sturdy explanations for why sudden shifts are experienced so vividly. Stress and grief infuse perception with distortions, while memory's fragility makes those distortions indistinguishable from fact. For many, this model is enough. For others, particularly where witness accounts resist explanation through trauma or false memory, it feels incomplete. And it is in that uncertainty, where psychological frameworks reach their limits, that researchers increasingly turn their attention elsewhere, searching for models framed not only in terms of memory and grief, but in terms of information, physics, and the very nature of consciousness itself. Quantum explanations gaining ground. Quantum models of consciousness are actively researched but remain controversial. Leading scientists are exploring microtubules, anesthetic isotope effects, and quantum computing tests, yet no consensus exists. Still, the idea has been gaining renewed attention, particularly as reality shift reports accumulate alongside advances in quantum technologies. The suggestion is that what many perceive as unusual breaks in continuity could have a counterpart in the quantum processes that shape awareness itself. The roots of this discussion stretch back decades. Physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff put forward the orchestrated objective reduction model, or orchestra, suggesting that quantum collapses within neuronal microtubules generate discrete moments of consciousness. Their theory struggled for acceptance because it was nearly impossible to test at the time. Now, with quantum computing advancing and neuroscientists creating brain organoids that respond to different states, a handful of experiments are beginning to revisit these early claims. For instance, the effect of anesthetics on microtubule activity is being tracked, to see whether quantum-level fluctuations correlate with changes in awareness. These are tentative tools and not final proof, but they represent a shift from speculation to evidence-seeking. Research groups at institutions like Google's Quantum AI Lab and the Allen Institute have also entered the conversation. Hartmut Neven, a physicist directing projects at Google's lab, has suggested that entanglement and superposition may provide the substrate for unified conscious states. His position is that consciousness might be better understood not as a purely biological process, but as a system interacting with quantum rules similar to those studied in quantum computing. In this framing, the brain's binding of countless sensory inputs into a coherent flow of awareness echoes the way entangled qubits share holistic states. It is an intriguing parallel, yet so far remains a hypothesis. Experiments proposed by collaborators, such as measuring whether brain activity could be correlated with entangled quantum processors, are technically futuristic, but they outline a path forward that did not exist even a decade ago. The multiverse interpretation adds a further dimension. In physics, each quantum event is thought to generate branches of possibilities, a proliferation of potential universes. Neven has extended this to suggest that consciousness may, in some way, act as the mechanism that chooses which branch is lived as reality. Under this lens, a sudden memory conflict or anomalous environment could hypothetically reflect a momentary interaction with an adjacent branch. The emphasis here is on hypothesis. The idea is not empirically demonstrated, but for researchers interested in bridging physics with reported shifts, it offers a framework capable of accommodating lived anomalies. Take, for example, reports where multiple witnesses recall the same change, a rearranged street or reversed apartment layout. From a psychological standpoint, these are cases of shared error or cultural contagion. From a speculative quantum standpoint, they are what one would expect if entangled conscious systems momentarily aligned with an alternative branch. A seamless shift witnessed by more than one person is difficult to reconcile under ordinary psychological error, but becomes theoretically possible if entanglement spreads beyond individual crania into a wider informational network. Entanglement's hallmark, that distant systems share a state instantly, offers a metaphor for why groups sometimes describe the same impossible detail. This is untested speculation, yet it illustrates how quantum thinking influences current debates. Mainstream neuroscience, however, emphasizes major challenges. The brain is warm, wet, and noisy, conditions thought to be hostile to quantum coherence, which usually requires near absolute zero and heavy isolation. Even researchers sympathetic to orchestra or quantum linkage theories admit this remains the strongest objection. Keeping delicate quantum states intact in a biological brain may not be feasible. Prominent neuroscientists have pointed out that while models involving microtubules or entanglement are stimulating, strong empirical evidence is still absent. The cautious consensus is that psychology and classical neural mechanisms explain current phenomena adequately, and that quantum approaches should be tested, but not treated as established pathways. This counterpoint is crucial, reminding audiences that while new hypotheses are exciting, they remain on uncertain ground. Technological advances are slowly offering ways to test these claims. Engineers are experimenting with non-invasive terahertz scanners tuned to detect vibrations thought to occur in microtubules. Some of these studies aim to watch how those resonances change during anesthesia, dream states, or various phases of waking consciousness. Any successful detection of stable quantum signatures inside neurons would strengthen orchestra OR's plausibility, though such results remain pending. Another line of inquiry considers isotope-dependent effects of anesthetics. If quantum spin is influencing consciousness, then altered isotopic composition might produce measurable differences in how anesthesia works. These are subtle tests, but unlike earlier decades, they are now within the range of laboratory possibility. Meanwhile, public fascination continues to grow. The linking of strange personal experiences with highly technical debates gives reality shift accounts a scientific scaffolding, even if many scientists themselves reject the connection. A father recalling an alternate childhood for his daughter, or a witness entering a mirrored apartment resonate differently when audiences hear that at least some physicists are exploring consciousness as a quantum state. The danger, say critics, is overstating speculative models as though they are verified explanations. But proponents counter that speculative models at least provide testable ideas beyond memory failure, where anomalies otherwise risk being dismissed outright. The tension underscores how science and subjective experience often intersect uneasily. For those who live through reality shifts, psychological models sometimes feel incomplete, unable to capture their vividness and internal certainty. Quantum interpretations, though speculative, offer one of the few scientific narratives that seem proportionate to the strangeness people describe. That proportionate framing explains why, in 2025, the topic has reached wider audiences. Not because answers have been found, but because there is now at least a conceivable bridge between physics and lived anomaly. Summarizing, the core claim is not that consciousness has been proven quantum, or that reality shifts have been shown to occur through superposition. Rather, it is that a growing minority of researchers see enough conceptual overlap to justify investigation. Orchestra or anesthetic isotope effects, terahertz monitoring, and speculative plans for coupling brain states with quantum processors attest to serious attention. At the same time, equally serious objections remain. Whether or not testing eventually validates these models, the field now contains structured hypotheses, which reshapes the conversation around reality shifts by giving them a theoretical foothold in contemporary science. And it is precisely within this foothold that the discussion begins to open outward. Quantum mechanics does not stop at microtubules or brain function. It extends to principles of entanglement, non-locality, and branching universes. These principles carry implications that reach far beyond individual awareness, raising the question of whether consciousness could participate in linkages larger than any single observer. Entanglement and parallel universes. Quantum entanglement is often described as one of the strangest features of physics. When two particles become entangled, their states remain bound together no matter how far they are separated. A change in one instantly defines the state of the other, even if separated by vast distances. This connection bypasses the limits of classical communication, which always requires signals moving at finite speeds. Einstein famously described it as spooky action at a distance, and though he objected to the concept, experiments over decades have consistently confirmed it. Some theorists suggest that if particles on opposite sides of the cosmos can remain linked, then realities branching from quantum events might also remain correlated in ways we have not yet learned to measure. In this respect, entanglement intersects with another framework in physics, the many worlds interpretation. Many worlds proposes that every quantum event produces a branching, each possible outcome carrying forward in its own parallel world. From this point of view, countless versions of history unfold at once, though our everyday awareness locks onto only one. Here, some researchers speculate that consciousness could act like an anchor, selecting a single outcome from the branching possibilities. Entanglement complicates this picture further, because it implies that branches may not be entirely isolated. Instead, they could remain woven into a larger tapestry, stitched together by connections that persist beyond locality. This has led some to propose that our awareness, under certain conditions, might register echoes of those hidden linkages. For those studying reality shift reports, these ideas provide one speculative framework for puzzling witness accounts. An individual who misremembers or reimagines an event may fall well within psychology's scope. But when groups of people simultaneously describe the same contradictory change, a shop apparently moving locations, a family photo displaying different faces, the explanation becomes less clear. In such cases, a few theorists suggest entanglement-like networks as a possible mechanism. If consciousness operates with quantum processes, perhaps those processes can align across people. Under such a model, awarenesses would not exist independently, but would sometimes synchronize, allowing groups to experience anomalies together. This is a proposal only, one meant to explain synchrony that memory error alone struggles to cover. A research group in Kentucky published a speculative paper in 2025 along these lines. They outlined how microtubules inside neurons, where quantum activity has been hypothesized to influence consciousness, might participate in wider entanglement. Their idea was that these entangled links could sometimes extend beyond individual brains, operating as a network that shapes perception across multiple people at once. In such a model, when one consciousness shifted into registering an alternate possibility, others bound within that network might do the same. They argued that this would explain why some anomalies appear to be shared instantly and remembered consistently across separate witnesses despite material evidence suggesting stability. The proposal is intriguing because it echoes common features of many reports. Families recall personal histories that apparently diverge, commuters insist a landmark switch locations, and neighbors describe simultaneous environmental changes. Traditional psychology explains memory distortion well at the level of individuals, but not always at the scale of groups who claim the same misplacement at the same time. The notion of entanglement-like networks provides a way to imagine why experience could ripple outward, synchronizing perception across people who share no obvious suggestive cues. Yet researchers stress this is speculative. No experiment has demonstrated entanglement of consciousness. The concept should be seen as a hypothesis rather than a conclusion. Testing it is especially difficult. Consciousness already presents enormous challenges for empirical science. Adding entanglement multiplies the complexity. Some have pointed to non-invasive methods like nuclear magnetic resonance that could, in principle, probe whether biological tissue sustains quantum coherence. Others suggest coupling brain states to entangled qubits in experimental settings. But these goals exceed what technology currently allows. Even studies of quantum coherence in microtubules or isotope-dependent responses to anesthetics, two lines of research often cited in connection with quantum consciousness, remain at the stage of suggestive signals, not definitive demonstrations. They hint that quantum processes might influence aspects of awareness, but do not show consciousness behaving as a macroscopic entangled system. This sets an important boundary. When accounts of shared anomalies are compared with entanglement, the idea remains an analogy or model. It is not an established mechanism. At best, it provides a way to think about how multiple witnesses come to describe identical irregularities, even though material records do not corroborate them. The takeaway for viewers is this: if entanglement-based models were ever confirmed, they could explain the simultaneity of such reports. But experimental proof would require breakthroughs well beyond what is now possible. Until then, entanglement remains a speculative lens rather than an answer. Still, even a speculative framework has value because it calibrates the scale of the puzzle. If memory distortion alone were responsible, each individual's errors would scatter. Instead, in some reports, they converge with remarkable precision. Entanglement at least provides a language for why patterns would line up, why anomalies would be experienced simultaneously, and why recollections would synchronize. The fleeting nature of many events adds to this picture. Just as entangled states collapse quickly when disturbed, these anomalous experiences often vanish in a short span, leaving only memories that contradict the physical record. By analogy, the shared awareness may briefly align, then restabilize, producing accounts that feel consistent among witnesses but leave no measurable trace. Critics remain unconvinced and argue that social and psychological factors offer stronger explanations. Collective memory distortion, suggestibility, and subtle cues among witnesses can generate apparently shared recollections, even when no anomaly occurred. Well-documented research in psychology shows that groups can reinforce false memories until they align across multiple people. From this perspective, invoking quantum entanglement adds unnecessary complexity. It moves beyond available data and risks confusing metaphors for validated processes. Supporters, however, see value in keeping the question open. They point out that entanglement is real at the particle scale, and that research into quantum processes in biological systems is underway. Failing to test, or at least consider its possible role in consciousness, could mean missing a viable explanation for outliers that current models cannot address. For them, the fact that entanglement is already part of mainstream physics gives it more weight than explanations relying solely on cultural contagion or coincidence. What both sides agree on is the need for restraint. Borrowing language from physics can make models sound more certain than they are. For now, experiments measuring coherence in microtubules and anesthetic isotope effects show slight but intriguing patterns, not confirmation of consciousness entanglement. Any full validation would require technologies able to link subjective awareness with objective quantum measures in real time, a step still years away. Yet even as speculation, entanglement networks illustrate the kinds of questions now shaping the conversation. They suggest that anomalies might not only be individual quirks, but perhaps group-level dynamics tied to a deeper fabric. Whether that fabric operates through quantum mechanics, psychology, or culture remains unresolved. What matters is that the reports exist, and they often point to synchrony among witnesses that simple misremembering does not easily resolve. With this in mind, the role of entanglement and parallel universes stands less as an explanation than as a reminder. Reality shift accounts have attracted frameworks from across the sciences because they resist easy classification. Entanglement models are unproven, but they capture one possible route for why people sometimes remember the same impossible detail together. Until experiments catch up, they remain possibilities on the edge of science, bridges between established physics and lived testimonies that unsettle our sense of continuity. And it is in these unsettled spaces that the larger issue returns. Across the many cases we have already seen, families divided by memory, spaces rearranged overnight, witnesses convinced of alternate outcomes, the central question emerges: are people misperceiving, or are they, in some form, crossing timelines? Case 4. The father's wrong history. In February of 2025, a college student returned home for a weekend with her family, expecting nothing more unusual than conversation about studies and future plans. What unfolded during that visit, however, challenged her sense of stability within her own household. While eating dinner together, her father began telling stories of her teenage years, holidays, hobbies, and school events that she did not recognize at all. He spoke warmly, as though recalling familiar moments, but each detail sounded foreign to her lived experience.